The rain fell like a cold, relentless curtain that night, turning the village streets into a dark maze. Jeremy walked hurriedly, his head down to shield himself from the biting wind, when he heard a sound that chilled his heart. It was a cry, fragile and desperate, lost in the noise of the storm. He followed the sound to a solitary tree, where he found a young girl huddled, trying to protect two small bundles of cloth from the rain. "Please don't come any closer," she shouted, her voice choked with fear. But Jeremy, sensing the desperation and anguish in those words, stopped in his tracks. "I won't hurt you. I'm here to help," he replied, his voice soft but firm, trying to break through the barrier of fear surrounding the girl. Deborah looked at him, her eyes wide and full of tears. They are my brothers. They have no one," she confessed, hugging the small bodies as if the mere act of letting go would make them disappear. Jeremy felt a pang of pain upon seeing the pale faces of the twins, Benjamin and Samuel. "They're so fragile," he thought, his heart filling with overwhelming compassion. "You don't have to do this alone. Come on, let me help you," he insisted, extending his hand to her, but without forcing. Deborah's eyes reflected a mix of fear and hope. With a trembling breath, she nodded. "Please help us," she murmured, allowing Jeremy to approach without hesitation. Jeremy picked up one of the twins, feeling the small, cold body in his arms. "Let's go. My house isn't far. You all need to get warm," he said, covering the baby with his coat. Deborah tried to stand, but her legs trembled from exhaustion. "Here, lean on me," Jeremy suggested, wrapping her arm around his shoulders. With every step, the ground seemed to give way beneath their feet, but Jeremy remained steady, determined to get them to safety. "They're so cold and I'm so scared," Deborah whispered, almost as if she were confessing a secret. "I know," Jeremy responded tenderly. "But you're not alone anymore. We'll get through this together." The journey to Jeremy's house was short, but for Deborah, each second felt like an eternity. When they finally arrived, he pushed the door open with a shoulder, revealing a modest but cozy interior. "Quick, get inside," he exclaimed, helping her across the threshold. The warmth of the fireplace enveloped them immediately, a sharp contrast to the cold night. Deborah nearly collapsed upon feeling the warmth and safety of that place. "Put them by the fire," Jeremy instructed, while he himself arranged blankets on the floor to accommodate the little ones. "Everything will be fine. They'll be fine," he repeated, more to himself than to her, as if those words could guarantee the safety of those now under his care. Deborah, sitting beside the twins, looked at Jeremy with gratitude and exhaustion. I don't know how to thank you," she began, but Jeremy raised his hand, gently interrupting her. "You don't need to thank me. The important thing now is that you're safe," he replied with a smile that conveyed a calmness Deborah hadn't felt in a long time. He then brought her a cup of hot tea. "Here, this will help calm your nerves," he said, and Deborah took the cup with trembling hands, feeling the warmth spread through her body as the steam rose, caressing her face. The twins, now warm and fed, finally fell asleep, their small bodies relaxing for the first time in hours. Jeremy watched them with a soft gaze, as if they were already part of his own family. "You're a good man," Deborah said, her voice choked with emotion. "I was so scared. I thought no one would care." Jeremy knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Believe me, love and compassion still exist, even in the most unexpected places. And as long as I can, I'll take care of you," he promised, his words laden with sincerity and determination. Deborah, finally allowing herself to relax, let out a long, trembling sigh, feeling a wave of hope wash over her soul. "Thank you for everything," she murmured before leaning back and closing her eyes. But for Jeremy, the night was just beginning. While Deborah and the twins slept, he sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames and thinking about what the future held. The morning slowly began to break, bringing with it the soft light that filtered through the window of Jeremy's small house. While the warmth of the fireplace still heated the room, Deborah, sitting in a nearby chair, silently watched the twins sleep peacefully. Jeremy, noticing the girl's restlessness, approached slowly, sitting beside her. "Deborah, You're safe now, but I need to understand better what happened. Why were you alone with your brothers on the street? Where's your mother? He asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Deborah bit her lip, struggling against the urge to cry. She was just a child but had already seen and experienced things that no adult should ever go through. My mother. Her name is Sydney, the girl began, her voice fragile but determined to tell what she knew. She worked for a bad man named Logan. He was rich and powerful, and everyone was afraid of him. He and my mother, they had an affair, she revealed, with an innocence mixed with an early understanding of the gravity of what she was saying. Jeremy nodded, encouraging her to continue. And then what happened? He asked, already feeling a knot forming in his stomach, anticipating what was to come. Deborah took a deep breath, as if preparing to face the painful memories. Mom, she got pregnant with Benjamin and Samuel. When she told Logan, he got very angry. He said she couldn't have the babies, that he didn't want to know about children, that he was too important to worry about that, the girl said, her voice faltering as the words came out in a trembling whisper. Sydney, being a loving and protective mother, could not simply accept that her children would be rejected and ignored. She wanted Logan to take responsibility, to recognize the twins as his children, even if it meant facing the consequences. Mom was brave. She told him he had to be a father, that he had to take care of us. Deborah continued, now staring at the floor. But Logan, he got even angrier. He said that if she didn't leave and stay quiet, horrible things would happen to all of us, that he had the power to do anything, she reported, her voice growing darker as she recalled the threats. Jeremy gently squeezed her hand, offering the comfort he could. That must have been very hard for your mother, he commented, his voice laden with empathy. Deborah nodded, her eyes beginning to fill with tears. Mom was very scared. She knew he could do bad things. So one night, she woke me up and told me to get the babies. She said we needed to run away, that we had to get far away, she explained, her voice breaking as the tears now streamed down her face. She said she would catch up with us, that she would meet us later, but she never came. I waited, Jeremy. I waited, but she didn't come back, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper as she sobbed. Jeremy's heart ached hearing those words. He could imagine Sydney's desperation, having to make such a painful decision, sending her children away in the hope of protecting them from a ruthless man like Logan. So you ran away with your brothers to save their lives. You were very brave, Jeremy said, feeling a deep admiration for that child who, despite being so young, had faced such a terrible situation with extraordinary courage. Deborah wiped her eyes with the back of her hands, trying to pull herself together. I just want Mom to come back. I just want her to be okay, she murmured, her voice filled with a sadness Jeremy knew shouldn't exist in someone so young. We will find her, Deborah. I promise we will look for your mom, and Logan will pay for everything he's done, he said, now more determined than ever. The story Deborah had told not only revealed the extent of the danger they were facing, but also the depth of Logan's evil, who was willing to do anything to keep his reputation intact. As Deborah exhaustedly fell asleep, Jeremy sat beside the twins, his mind racing with the next steps he would need to take. He knew he was entering a dangerous battle, but the lives of those three and Sydney depended on his courage and determination. Logan's shadow was large, but Jeremy was willing to face it. With Deborah's revelation still echoing in his mind, Jeremy knew he needed to act quickly. He wasn't foolish. He knew he couldn't face someone as powerful and dangerous as Logan alone. There was one person he could trust, someone with enough experience to help him devise a plan. Brian, an old friend and former policeman who, despite leaving the force, was known for his integrity and never giving up the fight for justice. I need your help, Brian, Jeremy thought as he prepared to leave. He knew he was risking everything, but there was no other option. When he arrived at Brian's modest home, Jeremy was greeted with a look of surprise. Jeremy, what brings you here at this hour? Brian asked, noticing the worried expression on his friend's face. Jeremy hesitated for a moment, but knew he couldn't waste time. Brian, I'm in trouble and I need your help. I found 3 children, and they're in danger because of Logan, he began, feeling the urgency in his words. Brian frowned upon hearing Logan's name, his old enemy from long ago. "Come in, let's talk," Brian said, his voice firm but full of curiosity and concern. Sitting at the kitchen table, Jeremy told Brian everything. Deborah's trembling hands, Logan's threats, Sydney's disappearance, and the imminent danger looming over the twins. Brian listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each passing detail. "Logan has always been a dangerous man, but I didn't think he was capable of something so cruel," Brian commented, his eyes fixed on the void as his mind worked quickly. "Jeremy, you did the right thing by coming to me. But we need to be very careful. Logan has eyes and ears everywhere," he warned, the gravity of the situation becoming clear to both. "I know it's risky, but I can't just sit back," Jeremy responded, his voice filled with emotion and determination. "These children need protection, and Sydney, she may be in danger. I can't let Logan keep hurting innocent people," he continued, his pleading gaze meeting Brian's. Brian took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility he was about to take on. "You're right, Jeremy, and I'll do everything I can to help. But we need to be strategic. Logan won't go down easily," Brian said, already beginning to outline a plan in his mind. The two spent hours discussing what to do, analyzing every detail of the story and planning their next step. "First, we need to gather evidence. Without it, we have nothing against Logan," Brian said, getting up from the table and starting to pace back and forth. "I still know some people in the police force we can trust, a few of them, but we need to be discreet. Any wrong move, and he'll find out," he continued, his mind working at full speed. Jeremy agreed, knowing that this was the only way to ensure Deborah, Benjamin, and Samuel's safety. "Let's start with the basics, finding Sydney," Jeremy suggested, his voice laden with hope. "If we can find her, she can testify against Logan and help protect them," he added, feeling a new wave of determination growing within him. Brian nodded. "We need to find out where she is, if Logan hasn't already hidden her somewhere. And at the same time, we need to start gathering evidence against him. Anything that can link Logan to his threats and actions against Sydney and the children," Brian explained, his mind already drawing the lines of investigation. Before they parted, Brian placed a firm hand on Jeremy's shoulder. "Jeremy, I know you're doing this for the kids, but I want you to know that this is a dangerous fight. Logan won't hesitate to do anything to protect himself. You need to be prepared for anything," he warned, his voice serious. Jeremy nodded, feeling the weight of his friend's words. "I know, Brian, but these kids deserve to live without fear, and I won't let Logan destroy their lives," he responded, the determination in his voice stronger than ever. With the plan in place and new hope in his heart, Jeremy returned home, where Deborah and the twins awaited him. He knew the journey ahead would be arduous, but with Brian by his side, he felt they finally had a chance. With the initial plan drawn up, Jeremy and Brian began working tirelessly to gather the necessary evidence that could incriminate Logan and ensure the safety of Deborah, Benjamin, and Samuel. The first weeks were marked by constant tension, where every step was taken with caution and every conversation whispered, fearing that Logan might be listening. Brian, with his experience as a former policeman, knew exactly where to look and how to avoid raising suspicions. "We need to be meticulous," Jeremy, Brian often said. "Logan has eyes and ears everywhere. One wrong move, and everything could fall apart." Brian began contacting old colleagues in the police force, those he still trusted, asking for help discreetly. "I can't reveal everything, but I need information on Sydney's whereabouts and any documents that might link Logan to his illegal activities," he requested, using his network of contacts to obtain crucial clues. Meanwhile, Jeremy did what he could, taking care of the children and maintaining a facade of normality, while the worry about Deborah and the twins' safety consumed him. "They can't know what we're doing," Brian reminded him. "Logan is smart, but we need to be smarter." The first clues came from one of Brian's contacts who, despite being reluctant, eventually provided valuable information about Logan's shady dealings. There are records of suspicious transfers of large sums of money, but they are hidden among legitimate transactions. "It will be difficult to prove anything, but it's not impossible," Brian explained as he showed Jeremy the documents he had obtained. Although Jeremy didn't fully understand the technical details, He felt they were on the right track. "This could be the tip of the iceberg, Brian. We need to dig deeper," he said with a determination that grew stronger every day. As they continued their search for evidence, one of the most tense moments occurred when Brian gained access to a property Logan used as a hideout for his darkest operations. "We got a lead on where Logan might be hiding something important, but it's risky. We need to get in and out without leaving a trace," Brian warned, aware of the imminent danger. Jeremy, without hesitation, agreed to accompany him. "I can't stay out of this. If it helps save Sydney and the children, I'm willing to take the risk," he said, his voice firm. The infiltration into Logan's property was a test of nerves and skills. Every step was taken in absolute silence, and the tension in the air was palpable. Upon entering the house, Brian and Jeremy discovered a secret room where incriminating documents were stored. "Here they are," Brian whispered, opening a hidden safe. "These documents link Logan to various illegal operations, including threats and bribes. This is what we needed," he added with a mix of relief and caution. Jeremy held the papers in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility. "This will help bring him down," he murmured, with hope and fear mixed in his heart. The collection of evidence was a success, but with it came increased vigilance. Logan began to suspect that something was being plotted against him. His henchmen started to monitor more closely those he considered enemies, and the tension around Jeremy and Brian grew. "We need to be more careful than ever, Jeremy. He's making moves, and that means we're getting close, but it also means the danger's growing," Brian warned, while keeping a watchful eye on Logan's movements. Jeremy knew that the situation was becoming increasingly risky, but there was no turning back. "We're close to exposing Logan, and we can't stop now," he affirmed, trying to hide the fear that accompanied him. With the evidence in hand, Jeremy and Brian began preparing the next step, exposing Logan. It was a race against time, and every second counted. The days that followed were a whirlwind of frantic and cautious activities as Jeremy and Brian prepared for the final step in their plan to bring down Logan. With the evidence organized and a meticulously designed plan for exposure, it seemed they were finally one step away from achieving justice. Jeremy felt a mix of hope and growing anxiety. All he wanted was to ensure the safety of Deborah, Benjamin, and Samuel, as well as find Sydney, whose chances of being alive were becoming increasingly uncertain. However, he trusted Brian throughout this journey. The former policeman had proven to be a loyal friend and a valuable ally. On the night they planned to strike the final blow, Brian suggested meeting in a secluded location, far from prying eyes and possible spies of Logan. "We have to be extremely careful, Jeremy. Let's meet in a safe place, bring the evidence, and together we'll deliver it directly to the press and the authorities," Brian said with seriousness that at that point, Jeremy did not question. Jeremy prepared everything as agreed, making sure Deborah and the twins were safe before leaving. "Don't take too long, Jeremy," Deborah said, grabbing his hand before he left. Jeremy knelt down to her level, looking into her eyes. "I promise I'll be back soon, and when I return, all of this will be over. You'll be safe," he assured, trying to hide his own unease. She nodded, trying to be brave, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. The designated location was an old abandoned factory with broken windows and moss-covered walls that exuded a sense of abandonment and despair. The shadows of the old machines created sinister shapes under the dim light of the few lamps that still worked. Jeremy entered, feeling the cold, damp air around him as his footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Brian was already there, waiting with an expression of extreme concentration. "Did you bring everything?" Brian asked bluntly. "Yes, it's all here," Jeremy replied, handing over a thick folder full of incriminating documents and evidence. Brian took the folder, examining its contents for a few moments. "Finally, this will end," Jeremy said, trying to suppress the mix of relief and tension growing inside him. "Yes, it will end," Brian replied, but something in his voice made Jeremy shiver. It was a cold tone, devoid of the camaraderie they had shared until then. Jeremy felt a chill down his spine, as if a deep instinct was trying to warn him of something. "Brian, what's going on?" he asked, his tone shifting from expectation to concern. Before he could react, Jeremy felt a strong blow to the back of his head, causing him to stumble and fall to his knees. The world spun around him as his vision blurred, and pain throbbed in his head. He tried to get up, but soon realized he was not alone. From the shadows emerged imposing men with cruel looks, quickly surrounding him. "Brian, what is this?" Jeremy shouted as he tried to understand what was happening. Brian slowly approached, now with an expression that was not of guilt, but of calculated coldness. "I'm sorry, Jeremy, but business is business," he said, his voice laden with an indifference that cut through Jeremy like a sharp blade. Jeremy tried to process the words, but the pain and betrayal he felt left him speechless. You were with him the whole time?" he asked, his voice trembling, trying to grasp the last hope that all of this was a nightmare. "I did what had to be done. Logan paid me well to make sure you didn't interfere. He knew everything from the beginning. Every move you made, Jeremy. You never had a chance," Brian replied without any trace of remorse. The words pierced deep into Jeremy's soul, each carrying a devastating weight. "I trusted you. Why, Brian? Why betray me like this?" Jeremy murmured, feeling his strength leave his body. "Because power and money speak louder. They always have," Brian said with chilling coldness, as Logan's men grabbed Jeremy and dragged him to the opposite side of the factory. "Take him to the usual place. The boss wants to have a conversation with him before ending this," Brian ordered, his voice now completely devoid of any human warmth. Jeremy, though still dazed by the blow and betrayal, tried to fight back, but was quickly overpowered by the henchman. The fear and pain in his heart were now almost unbearable. Deborah, the twins, Sydney, he thought, desperate for not being able to keep the promise he had made. As he was forcibly taken out of the factory, Jeremy heard the sound of a heavy door closing behind him, as if the world was collapsing around him. The darkness of the night enveloped them as they reached the car, and Jeremy was thrown into the back seat without any consideration. His thoughts were confused, his head throbbing, but a single word echoed in his mind: betrayal. He had been betrayed by someone he trusted blindly, and now he was at the mercy of the man who had caused so much suffering to his new family. "This can't end like this, it can't," he thought, the hope slowly fading, but still present like a flickering flame. The car started moving, taking Jeremy to an unknown and certainly dangerous destination. He knew his life was in danger, but worse than that, he knew he had failed those who depended on him. The fear for Deborah, Benjamin, and Samuel was like poison, eating away at him from the inside as he desperately tried to think of a way out of that situation. But with his hands tied and his head spinning, the reality of his situation seemed increasingly bleak. While Jeremy was being taken away in the darkness, unable to fight against Brian's devastating betrayal, little Deborah tossed and turned restlessly in the small room where she was hiding with her brothers. Something in her childish heart wouldn't let her rest. Anxiety grew in her chest, and the feeling that something terrible was about to happen wouldn't leave her in peace. She couldn't stop thinking about Jeremy's words before he left. "I promise I'll be back soon." But the longer time passed, the more that silence became unbearable. "What if he needs me?" Deborah thought as she looked at the twins, asleep and unaware of the fear that tormented her. Determined to find out what was happening, Deborah decided to leave. With light, furtive steps like a small shadow, she left the room, making sure the twins were safe before leaving. The rain started to fall again, thin and steady, as she crossed the dark and deserted streets, driven by an instinct that led her in the direction where Jeremy had disappeared. The cold wind made her body tremble, but the courage growing in her chest was stronger than the fear. "I need to find him. He always helps me. Now it's my turn," she whispered to herself, like a prayer. After what seemed like an eternity, Deborah finally arrived at the old abandoned factory, where shadows danced sinisterly under the dim light of a few lamps. She crept along the damp, cracked walls, trying to find an entrance without being noticed. The place was silent, but there was a tension in the air that made her swallow hard. As she approached a broken window, Deborah peeked inside, and what she saw nearly stopped her heart. Jeremy was surrounded by men she didn't recognize, and Brian, the man Jeremy trusted so much, was standing beside them with a hard, impassive expression. He betrayed Jeremy, she thought, horrified. The fear she felt upon seeing the scene was overwhelming, but something inside her refused to give in. Deborah knew she needed to act, but what could a 7-year-old girl do against such dangerous men? Then she noticed Jeremy's phone lying on the floor, not far from where Brian was standing. Deborah's heart raced, but determination overcame fear. She needed proof. She needed something that could save Jeremy and expose Brian as the traitor he was. With extreme caution, Deborah crept through the darkness, her small feet moving without making a sound, until she managed to grab the phone unnoticed. With trembling hands, she activated the phone's recorder and began recording the conversation unfolding before her. "I did what you asked, Logan. He's here, ready to be taken care of," Brian said with a coldness that made Deborah shudder. She bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears, threatening to fall. "We had a deal, Brian. You delivered Jeremy, and I'll take care of the rest. We don't want any more complications. Remember, I'm always watching," replied a voice she didn't recognize, but knew was Logan's. Every word felt like a blow to her heart, but Deborah knew she couldn't stop as she continued recording. Deborah heard more terrible details about Logan's plans, his threats against Sydney and the twins, and how Brian had betrayed Jeremy from the beginning. It was all there in the recording, and she knew it was her only chance to save everyone she loved. When the conversation finally ended, Deborah quickly hid behind a pile of boxes, clutching the phone tightly to her chest, her heart beating so hard she feared the others might hear it. "I need to get out of here. I need to take this to someone who can help," she thought, trying to control her panic as the men began to take Jeremy outside. Deborah took advantage of the distraction to escape through the same window she had entered. She ran as fast as she could, feeling the weight of the world on her small but determined shoulders. "I need to save Jeremy. I need to save Mom," she repeated to herself like a mantra that pushed her to keep going, even when her body begged for rest. The night was cold and wet, but the heat of adrenaline kept Deborah moving. Deborah ran to the police station, the only place she could think of where she might find help. When she arrived, panting and soaked, she ran inside, attracting surprised looks from the few officers still on duty. "Please help. They've taken my friend. They're going to hurt Jeremy," she cried, her voice full of panic as she showed the phone she still held tightly. One of the officers, an older man with a kind look, knelt beside her. "Calm down, sweetheart. What happened? Who are they?" he asked, trying to calm the girl. Deborah, with broken breaths, explained what she had witnessed, her voice trembling but still firm. "They're going to hurt him, and there's the recording. I recorded everything," she said, handing the phone to the officer, who immediately realized the gravity of the situation. "We'll take care of this. You were very brave," he said in a serious tone. The officers began to mobilize, listening to the recording and preparing to act. But Deborah, even relieved to have found help, couldn't shake the fear of what might still happen. "Please save Jeremy and my mom," she pleaded, her voice full of an urgency that only those who love deeply can understand. The tension in the police station was palpable. Each passing second seemed to stretch the nerves of the officers, and especially of Deborah, who remained in a corner, watching everything with wide eyes and a racing heart. The recording she had obtained was all they needed to act, but time was short, and the margin for error was minimal. "We need to move now. Logan won't hesitate to eliminate Jeremy and anyone in his way," said the sergeant in charge, with a grave tone that made the urgency of the situation clear. "We're dealing with dangerous criminals, people. If a mistake is made, we could lose lives," he added as the rescue plan was quickly outlined. Deborah, though scared, couldn't stop thinking about Jeremy and her mother. "Please don't let anything bad happen to him," she whispered to the sergeant, who looked at her with an understanding and reassuring firmness. "I promise we'll do everything we can to bring them back safely," he replied before stepping away to coordinate the operation. Deborah's heart ached with uncertainty, but she knew she had to believe that everything would be okay. It was all she had left. The officers moved with precision, gearing up and reviewing every detail of the plan before heading out. Deborah's recording provided the crucial information about Jeremy's location, and that was their only advantage. "We have to be fast and silent. Logan may have more henchmen than we know, and we can't let him find out we're coming before it's time," said the sergeant, his words cutting through the air like a sharp blade. The rescue unit left the station in a tense formation. The silence in the car only accentuated the gravity of what was to come as they approached the old mansion where Logan kept his operations and where Jeremy was being held. The adrenaline in the vehicle increased. Remember, our main objective is to rescue Jeremy and any other victims there. Logan must be arrested, but the priority is saving lives, the sergeant emphasized, looking into the determined eyes of his men. They nodded in silence, aware of the risk they were taking, but equally aware that there was no other option. Time was against them, and every lost second could be fatal. The car stopped a safe distance from the mansion, and the officers got out silently, moving like shadows through the vegetation surrounding the place. Deborah had described in detail the entrance and layout she had seen, and that information was now vital. Split up. 2 will go through the front entrance to draw attention, while the others enter through the back. We need to be quick, ordered the sergeant as each took their position. The tension was almost unbearable, but training and determination kept them focused. The invasion was quick and precise. While 2 officers broke down the front door, creating the necessary chaos to distract Logan's men, the others entered through the back, moving quickly through the dimly lit corridors. The shouts and sound of gunfire echoed through the mansion, creating a scene of controlled chaos. "Search for Jeremy. He must be somewhere isolated," shouted the sergeant as the men scoured every corner of the place, weapons in hand and eyes alert to any movement. Jeremy, locked in a cold, dark room in the basement, heard the sound of the confusion upstairs. For a moment, his heart filled with hope. They came. They came. He thought, struggling against the ropes that bound his hands. The hours of waiting and Logan's constant threats had drained his strength, but the determination to survive and protect the children still burned in his chest. He knew he couldn't give up, not now. When the door to the room was finally broken down, the light from the flashlights blinded him for a moment, but he soon recognized the uniforms. "Jeremy, are you alive?" asked one of the officers, rushing toward him. I'm okay," Jeremy replied, his voice hoarse and weak, but with immense relief flooding his being. The officers quickly cut the ropes, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you out of here," the sergeant said, holding Jeremy firmly. But the relief was interrupted when Logan, realizing he was cornered, decided to make his last move. "No one gets out of here alive," he shouted, emerging from one of the corridors with a gun in hand, his eyes gleaming with hatred and desperation. The sergeant immediately positioned himself in front of Jeremy, weapon pointed at Logan. "Drop the gun, Logan. You're surrounded. This is over," he ordered, his voice firm as steel. But Logan, at the height of his desperation, just smiled, a smile that chilled the blood. "It's over for you, not for me," he replied, pulling the trigger. The sound of the shot echoed through the room, followed by a deafening silence. Jeremy felt time stop for an eternal second before realizing the sergeant had deflected the shot at the last moment, the bullet hitting the wall beside him. In a swift move, the officers reacted. Logan was disarmed and taken to the ground, handcuffed before he could cause any more harm. "You're going to pay for all this, Logan," the sergeant said, looking down at the fallen man with contempt. Jeremy, still trembling, felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I thought I wouldn't make it out alive," he murmured, holding onto the sergeant's shoulder. "You're strong, Jeremy, and someone didn't give up on you. She helped us get here in time," the sergeant replied with a slight smile. Jeremy knew immediately who he was talking about. The rescue was successfully completed, and Jeremy, still shaken, was taken to the police station where Deborah waited for him with a heart full of hope and fear. When he walked through the door, the relief in the girl's eyes was so intense that she ran to him, hugging him with all her might. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered, sobbing against his chest. Jeremy hugged her tightly, feeling the tears streaming down his face. "I promised, didn't I? And you saved my life, Deborah." "You were amazing," he replied, his voice choked with emotion. The morning sun shone softly through the windows of the police station, spreading a warm light that contrasted with the days of fear and darkness that Deborah, Jeremy, and the twins had faced. The atmosphere which had once been tense, was now filled with palpable relief. Logan was in prison, finally defeated, and the justice that had seemed unattainable was now becoming a reality. Jeremy, still bearing the marks of the battle on his body, but with a lighter heart, watched the children as they played in the corner of the waiting room. A gentle smile curved his lips as he saw that, despite everything, there was still room for joy and innocence. The news of Logan's arrest quickly spread through the village, bringing a mix of surprise and relief to the residents. For so long, he had ruled with fear, manipulating and threatening, but now his reign of terror had come to an end. He won't hurt anyone anymore, Jeremy thought, feeling a wave of gratitude for everyone who had helped him, but especially for Deborah, whose bravery and determination had been crucial in dismantling Logan's web of lies and crimes. "You saved all of us, little one," Jeremy said, stroking Deborah's hair, who looked up at him with a shy smile. But even with Logan out of the picture, one question remained unanswered. What had happened to Sydney? During the rescue operation, the police had found clues about her whereabouts, and now everyone waited anxiously for news. Time seemed to drag on, each minute filled with expectation and hope. Finally, one of the officers entered the room with an expression that mixed exhaustion and satisfaction. "We have good news," he announced, catching everyone's attention. "We found Sydney. She was being held at a remote property, but she's alive. The doctors are taking care of her now, and it looks like she'll recover." The officer's words sounded like music to Jeremy and Deborah's ears. The relief was so intense that Deborah collapsed into tears, sobbing with happiness. "Mom, she's alive," she murmured, barely able to believe it. Jeremy pulled her into a tight hug, feeling his own eyes fill with tears. "I told you we'd find her," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding and recovery. Sydney, though weak and shaken by what she had been through, was reunited with her children, and the reunion was a scene that touched the hearts of all present. Seeing Deborah, Benjamin, and Samuel, she cried tears of joy, hugging them with all the strength she had left. "I thought I'd never see you again," Sydney said, her voice trembling as she stroked the twins' faces. "Mom, we're together now, and we're going to be okay," Deborah replied, trying to hold back her own tears. Jeremy, watching the scene from afar, felt an enormous weight lift off his shoulders. He had kept his promise, protecting the children and finding Sydney. But more than that, he had rediscovered a strength within himself that he didn't know he had. "You are an incredible family," he said when he finally approached. Sydney, still emotional, looked at Jeremy with an expression of deep gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you, Jeremy. You saved my children's lives and mine too," she said, her voice soft but full of sincerity. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just happy I could help," Jeremy replied, smiling. He knew that despite everything, the journey they had traveled together had changed them forever. What began as an act of compassion on that cold, rainy night had turned into something much greater, a new family united not just by blood, but by love, hope, and resilience in the face of adversity. The future, which had once seemed dark and uncertain, now shone with the promise of better days. As the weeks passed, life began to find a new rhythm. Deborah, Benjamin, Samuel, and Sydney settled into Jeremy's home, which had become a haven for them all. The village, once marked by Logan's shadow, was now a place of renewal and hope. The residents, inspired by the courage of Jeremy and Deborah, began to rebuild their lives, confident that good, despite all the challenges, had prevailed. And so, surrounded by new friends and the peace they had longed for, Jeremy and his new family found what had seemed unattainable, a life full of love, hope, and a promising future. Despite the scars they carried, they knew that together they could face anything. After all, Jeremy thought, no matter how dark the night may be, the sun always comes back to shine, bringing with it a new chance to start over. As we reach the end of a story, reflection is inevitable. Would you have Jeremy's courage, Deborah's bravery, or Sydney's unconditional love? This journey reminds us that even in the most desperate situations, love and hope can guide us. The fight for justice, though difficult, is worth every effort. Think about it. How can we apply the strength in our daily lives? If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications to keep following inspiring stories like this one.